Welcome, everyone. This is the official start of 3 wonderful days of meeting together. This is brought to you by actually yourselves, because your survey told us this was the topic. This was the #1 topic that you let us know in January you wanted us to address. So this program has been put together because you wanted it. So I am Pam Shea, the Oregon State Program VP. I want to welcome you to this evening's presentation, Book and School Board Challenges in Oregon. Throughout the state of Oregon, public libraries, school libraries, and even bookstores have felt the turbulence of the latest culture wars. A demand for banning books that some consider unsuitable for young people have put library boards and school boards in a position of arguing against censorship. So tonight we bring you 2 distinguished Oregon librarians that are engaged in the struggle, as well as our very own president, Linda, who is a retired librarian from Oregon State, to talk a little bit about their experiences and the challenges. And Linda will specifically address how we will move forward as members of AAUW. So with that, Claire Berger, let me tell you, a co-chair of our State Public Policy Committee, has graciously agreed to be our facilitator this evening. All right, Claire, I'm going to turn the meeting over to you.
All righty, welcome. This is a wonderful group of people. We're really looking forward to talking about libraries and book banning. There have been several instances within a couple of our branches where this has been front and center to their interests and their communities. I'd like to start with introducing, first of all, April. April Younglove. She's the one with all the books in back of her. She is an adult librarian in Lake Oswego Public Library. Prior to joining the library, April worked as a high school librarian in La Cañada, California, and at Lake Oswego High School. They also worked for the Rochester Regional Library Council in New York State on the New York Heritage website, which is a part of the Digital Public Library of America. April is passionate about defending intellectual freedom and closely follows book banning news here in Oregon. Thank you, April. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Greg Martin is a native of California who moved to Oregon with his family at the turn of the century. That's 2000, right, Greg? Turn of the century. Okay. He has been the Adult Services Librarian at Wilsonville Public Library for nearly 23 years and has maintained an interest in the intersection of politics and public life, both in the library sphere and more broadly. Looking forward to hearing from you as well, Greg. Let's go ahead and start with April. That's okay. And we're really looking forward to hearing from you and what you have to tell us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Claire. I'm going to screen share. So as I was introduced, I am an adult services librarian in Lake Oswego, and I did a presentation earlier in the year, and there is unfortunately still a lot of interest in this topic. So I was going to mention too briefly, all of these slides are going to be available afterwards, and anywhere you see in the slides that it's underlined, that is a link to my sources if you're curious about reading more about where I got my information. So first couple slides, Greg is going to talk about a bit more in depth because I really think Greg does a great job of getting into the philosophy of book banning and what is banning and what is challenging. But just really quickly, so that we're all on the same page, a book challenge is when someone says, hey, take that book out of the library. A book ban is when the library goes, okay, and they take the book out of the library. So there's 2 different things that get talked about, and it can seem much scarier than it actually is if you're reading about book challenges, because there are always more book challenges than there are book bans. So if you're following the news, and it sounds like you are, and that's probably why you asked about this presentation, you know that the number of titles in libraries has not just been going up over the last 2 years, it has been growing exponentially. And even the statistics recently came out for 2023, almost double what we had the year before, and that is double the number of titles challenged. So that's the number of books that someone somewhere said, take this out of the library. And it's for sure the highest that the ALA, the American Library Association, has ever recorded. So a little bit of history as we start talking about book banning. It's really important to know that book banning in the past is different than book banning now, but also kind of the same. And you're going to see how it's changed and how it stays the same. So what gets challenged over time is not always the same thing. So if we'll notice 1885, Huckleberry Finn, that's one of the first books ever challenged in the US. It was challenged for being trash and for the slums by the good librarians in Concord, Massachusetts. And as you can see, the pet reasons that things get in trouble kind of reflects the times that we live in. So you can see, oh, in the 90s, magic and witchcraft was out. And then in the 2000s, racial slurs and violence, not cool. In 2013, Persepolis, oh my goodness, people were positively portraying Muslim people and they wanted their children to read it in the month of September, which aligned with September 11th, and they couldn't stand that. And then more recently, the hot thing to ban is anything at all with LGBTQIA characters or Black and brown characters. So that is the pet cause now, and probably it'll change again in the future. But at the moment, that is the topic that people are upset about. So how book challenges have changed. In the past, I would say even 5 or 6 years ago, the typical way that we would get book challenges in libraries, in school libraries, or in public libraries was somebody would walk in the door, they would see a book, or their child would come home with a book, and they would say, oh my gosh, how can you have that book in the library? I'm terribly upset by it. And they would go over and they would tell a librarian immediately, you have to get rid of that book. They might get really upset and they might write a letter to the editor of the paper, and the paper might publish that letter. And that might get all sorts of people upset about a book. But now we have social media, and everybody knows that social media has brought no challenges to our lives. It hasn't made anything more complicated in any way whatsoever. So what social media allows people who want to be upset about something to do is to project that to a much wider audience, much faster. So in addition to single individuals being sort of upset about single books, people can get attention sometimes for being upset, and that can make their accounts more popular. So they can use that upsetness to then start telling everybody else what to do. And so oftentimes there are single groups out there. I'll just name Libs of TikTok is one of these groups. That is telling everyone which books to ban, and they're telling them how to ban it, and they're saying, here's the list, go to your library and do it. The other thing that's changing is the strategies for book banning. In the past, it was almost always people walking into the library, and they would in person say, please ban these books. But now the strategy that people are using is to join school boards and government positions, and to use those positions to then take these lists of books that are being circulated and say, aha, now I'm in power and we are going to ban these. And then the last sort of change to how things were kind of done in the past when people were upset about an issue is that we now have a lot more doxing and harassing of libraries and librarians. And some groups that I've talked to aren't familiar with the term doxing. What that means is that a person on a social media account, for instance, will link to, say, an individual librarian's picture on their website or something, and they'll say, can you believe this person lets your child read this book? By the way, here's their personal address. Do with that what you will. So it's an implicit form of encouraging violence against individuals by providing information about them. And it's really uncool. It doesn't happen a lot, but it happens often enough that I did talk to a librarian here in Oregon where that happened. They had a program, I don't want to get it wrong, I believe it was in Seaside. They were not even sponsoring the program themselves at the library. They allowed a group of high schoolers to use one of their meeting rooms, and that group was a gay alliance, and they wanted to provide clothing for students who might want to transition genders. And so they had a clothing swap. And so this group, Libs of TikTok, heard about that, and they definitely tried to take the director of that library down. And that was very intense. So that's new in the world. But there's a silver lining. There's always silver linings. One of the silver linings is that even though every year there are more and more and more book titles challenged, there are fewer challenges. Now that sounds confusing, but I made this weird little graphic to try and explain it. So what that means is these are all 9,021 book titles were challenged. So that's all the numbers of books that were challenged. But there were only 938 times the challenges were made, meaning that each challenge that is being made in a library is an average of 9 to 10 books. So again, in the past, a person might have a problem with an individual book. This, in the current reality, what we have are people coming in with lists of books to ban. And then, side note, only a quarter of the school book challengers live in district, according to a Washington Post article. So what that means is that not only are the people who are challenging it not necessarily down the street, they may be trying to file their challenges over the phone or by email or other methods, and they don't even live there. So many of these challenges, in fact, of those 938, they're made sometimes by the same person. So there may be, I don't have the stats for sure, I couldn't find it, but it may be, say, a third less than that of actual angry people. So the number of angry people that we're dealing with is much smaller than it appears, which I think is great news, because what that means is that the number of people who maybe aren't angry and maybe who would like to protect the freedom to read can take heart, because if their voices are that powerful, how much more powerful is the voice of the majority? And we know based on surveys that have been sent out that the majority of people do trust school librarians to pick out materials, and the majority of people do want librarians to be in charge of selecting materials and do not want books banned. So we have the bigger voice, but the people who are trying to make their voices loud are doing a really good job making a few people speak really loud. So that pattern that was reflected nationally, I was showing you those national numbers. I'm gonna look at my notes here for a minute because I wrote it down. The Oregon numbers follow that pattern almost exactly. So 2023, there were 46 reports of challenge incidents. That's 46 times, possibly by the same person, but 93 titles. So a whole lot more books were being challenged than people were challenging them. And the pattern is that from the year before, that is more books challenged and fewer individual challenges. The other thing is that in that statistic from Oregon, sorry, I'm missing a slide here. So you're looking at something a little different. Forgive me for that. The other thing is that what that means is that the statistics in Oregon, I wanted to say, also include challenges to things above and beyond books. So when you hear that there were 46 reports of challenge incidents, that also includes people challenging things like, you can't hold that program here. We don't like that program. And we don't like your book display. So in the library that I worked at, there was a challenge, and the challenge was in Pride Month, I put up a Pride display, and people in the town of Lake Oswego, maybe one person, was frustrated and felt that that book display should not be anywhere near the hold shelf, and they felt it was too near the hold shelf where they might take their children who might see a book that might mention the word gay. And I put the display together, so I would like to say that I was not putting pornographic books on there. They were general interest books. Okay, now we're actually on this slide. Thank you for your patience. And this slide is talking about another thing that is a little bit different in the past. So now, when people are moving into government to make their small voices very loud, they are not only joining school boards, they are attempting to use their power to politically pass bills. They contact their senators and their congresspeople, and they say, we want a bill to remove library funding. So basically just defund the library. And we want that to be codified into law. We want to say that libraries are not allowed to associate with the ALA, which is a big problem, by the way, because the ALA is the body that not only gives library schools their certification, that's where we get our certification from. They also provide grants. So if you can't join the ALA, it's hard to get grant money from the ALA. The ALA provides a lot of other services that are very important for libraries to have. So preventing association with them is a problem. They would like laws to restrict the content of items allowed in the libraries, restrict the types of library programs offered, and hold librarians criminally liable for the items that they circulate. And then I have a link down here at the bottom, and there is a group, Every Library, I think, which was mentioned elsewhere, and they keep track of these types of things. So if you want to see all 158 state library bills that are currently in progress, you can read about them all. Now, in Oregon, the most recent legislation has hearteningly been in the other direction. The legislation that was proposed would have blocked schools from withholding access to books just based on their content. Actually, I should move this because it's blocking just based on for discriminatory reasons. So they would say the schools can't make a rule saying that you can't check out a book just because it has a Black character. So this bill passed the Senate, but died in committee, unfortunately. Although I'm heartened that we even had such a bill, because that's at least going the other direction from the bills that are being proposed elsewhere. And there are similar bills to this that are trying to get out ahead of the game in other states as well, where they're trying to pass these kinds of laws before the other kinds of laws can be passed. So it's a whole legal game that I don't have a legal degree for, and I'm not qualified for. So if you are a retired law person, that is a fantastic area where you could make a difference. My next slide is talking about how my library personally deals with challenges. And one of the reasons I want to talk about that is because I think that if you go on to do work in a school board or something else, that we have a number of really smart strategies that we use that I really admire. And then the other thing is that I wanted to note that libraries that are understaffed, libraries that don't employ librarians because they can't afford a librarian, so they hire paraprofessionals, they really unfortunately suffer because they don't have access to the same kinds of strategies, and they also don't have time. So school libraries are a really big target because school librarians are worked to the bone. And most school libraries in Oregon, unfortunately, are not staffed by librarians, they're staffed by paraprofessionals. So these overworked people are really easy targets to come in and say, hey, you should get rid of all these books. And the people there are like, I don't know, I guess so. And they may not even have a college degree because they're just slinging books. And there may be one librarian for the whole district. And that is what happened year before last with Canby, where they came in and they're like, hey, you should ban all these books. And they went, I guess we should take them off the shelf until we figure it out, which is what librarians who have more training connections and knowledge know you should never do. If there's a book challenge, you don't take it off the shelf and then figure out if you should keep it. You keep it on the shelf and you go through the process of the challenge, and then you only take it off the shelf if you agree that the ban is legitimate. Now, I'm saying all of this, and I do want to say one note of exception, because sometimes in other presentations I've had people say, well, are you extremist? Is there no way that you would ever consider moving a book? And I'm not. I want to give a little tiny anecdote. So one time I was working in a public library, and I had a big backlog of books on my desk that were left over from the person in the job before me. And they all were labeled on the top that the book said that they were young adult graphic novels. And I processed them all and I put them out on the shelf. And there was a graphic novel in that stack that was not a young adult graphic novel. It was a very explicit adult novel. And I had gone too fast. I had missed that. The person before me ordered it. I'm blaming them. It went out on the shelf. Now, the good news is that a very keen-eyed shelver caught that about 2 days after it hit the shelves. And they pulled it and they brought it to me and they said, is this where you want it? And the answer was no. That's not where we want it. We want it in the adult section. So that's the kind of challenge that is really useful. Sometimes there really are materials that, oops, they're in the wrong place. But the majority of the time, they're in the right place. So for instance, the author, John Green, who's a young adult author, a lot of his books in his home state were moved from the young adult section into the adult section. And he makes me laugh. He wrote a series of tweets explaining that actually he is literally a young adult author, which means that he writes his books for young adults, which means that they were young adult books, and putting them in the adult section is an insult to him, telling him he doesn't know how to do his job. So I found that pretty funny. All that to say is, in Lake Oswego, I am privileged to have very good leadership. They have created solidarity with our library board. We have developed policies. We love our policies. We have an intellectual freedom policy and a materials collection policy. And both of those, if you click on them and read them through, you see that they will, in fact, say that essentially librarians go through this process of selecting our books. This is the process that they use. This is the criteria that we use. And if you think that we missed something, challenge us. But basically, this is how we do it. This is why the book is there. And then the other thing that we do, and this is especially to combat what I've talked about with online attacks and people out of the area, is in order to challenge a book in Lake Oswego or a program or anything, we don't have our form online. We have the form at the front desk. You need to come in, you need to talk to us in person, and you need to fill out the form. The second thing that we do that actually I'm not taking credit for, but my boss did it, and I think it's brilliant. If you want to challenge 60 books, you have to fill out 60 forms, and one for each book, and then you need to have each book go through the whole process, which involves you reading the book, summarizing the book, and explaining very clearly why you want it. And in fact, our goal at the library is to hopefully never even get to that point, because before the second that you want to pick up one of those forms, that triggers a meeting with the library director, a one-on-one meeting. And ideally, the problem can be resolved in person. It's always easiest if people can talk through things in person. And sometimes, like I said, people have legitimate things that they're upset about. In the past year, we had a patron who was upset about one of the titles. He made an appointment to talk to the library director. The library director spoke to him, and his concern was that he only saw woke books on our book displays. He felt that we never ever had anything there to represent his point of view, and the libraries weren't for him anymore. And the director was able to say, well, actually, we have lots of books for you. And she took him over and showed him the shelves and showed him books that he would like by authors that she challenged him to say which authors he would like. And she said, we have that, and we have that, and we have that. And then they went and they looked at the displays together, and she said, and these here are pretty not specifically what you yourself would call woke. Would you like this book? Would you like that book? And she left him with some books to check out, which is ideal. That's the goal. The goal is that people can resolve things in a human way and to get as far away as possible from mass mob online violence. Violence, not just, with words. So what I have for you is a list of things that I use to stay informed and a list of suggestions. Earlier there was, I can't remember who said it. Was it Claire who said that you should join school boards and library board meetings? I totally agree with the suggestion. I think it's fantastic. I would love to see real library supporters do that with their free time. There's also a group called Parents Defending Schools and Libraries. They started in response to the Canby book bans. And they have continued. They did not dissolve after that, and they're actually growing stronger, and they're very interesting, and they provide a lot of resources for people who want more information about what it's like to navigate a landscape with lots of book bans as a citizen or a parent. You can track legislation on everylibrary.org, which I referred to. There's also an organization called Unite Against Book Bans, and they have something called book resumes. So if you are talking with somebody who is upset about a book and you don't know what that book is about, you can go and look at the Unite Against Book Bans book resumes. It lists a lot of the most commonly banned books that people are upset about. For instance, the novel Genderqueer, it's a graphic novel by Maya Kobabe. That's the #1. Definitely you could go read a book resume and see what it's about, and maybe share that with the person that you're talking to.
April,
And then yes.
you have 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I had no idea I was going to go ahead of time.
You're doing great. I love it. I love it.
got 2 slides because I was nervous. Okay, let's see if there's some stuff I can go back and see. I'm going to leave it on this slide, but I'll look on my notes for a second to see if there's some more interesting facts that I could throw at you.
You're doing
and
great.
We'll finish a minute or two early. Let's see. What did I not mention? Oh, so here's just some, because statistics are always fun. Earlier, when I said that the majority of books that are being targeted these days have to do with BIPOC and LGBTQIA, that exact number is 47%. So 47% of the titles challenged last year had those themes, and that was the explicit reason that they were being challenged. The number of titles last year at public libraries increased 92%, but the school libraries saw an increase of 11. So again, silver linings, school libraries didn't triple. They only went up a little bit. So it's the public libraries where I am that are suddenly sort of having a little bit more fun. And that's what I've got. I'm happy to toss it over to Greg a minute or two early.
Wonderful. Thank you, April.
You're welcome.
I have some questions too, so
Sure.
when
I
we
imagine
finish with this.
I'm going to guess people do have questions.
Thank you, April. We'll go to
You're
Greg.
welcome.
Greg. Hey, there you are.
Hello. Hello, everybody. My name is Greg Martin. as you already know, and I'd like to thank you for inviting me. I think the topic at hand is very important indeed, and I'm glad to be invited to perhaps give some background and hopefully some interesting stories, of which I have several. I would like to sort of segue into what I'm going to talk about by recounting something that happened to me about a year ago. I was taking a DEI class, as you all should know by now, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it was very interesting. It was very educational. I enjoyed it a lot. And it just so happened I was on Reddit at that time, and I came across this gigantically long video that somebody had put up that was actually the Proud Boys going into a library on the East Coast and challenging the library workers. And I was horrified for the usual reasons, but I was also horrified because they asked questions. They didn't come in smashing things and destroying things. They came in and asked questions about why these people supported what they did, why these library workers were doing what they did. They had their biases certainly on evident display. But what really impressed me, and not in a positive way, was the fact that very, very few of the library workers could really explain why they were doing what they were doing. I can probably provide you the link. I didn't do it. So having seen that, while I was in the Zoom class, I posted the link to this video to everybody in the class. And I started to get people looking at me kind of strangely. And I didn't quite understand it until after the class. I happened to look and noticed that the video was actually from the Proud Boys. Whoops. I emailed the facilitator. I told her that I was not trying to be provocative in any way, that I didn't want to cause trouble. But I also said what I said about this video still, I still support it. And that's the lesson I'd like to pass on right now is we all support intellectual freedom. We all support people being able to read what they want and do what they want. But you need to be able to make your case and state your case clearly, not just parrot words that you've heard, because it doesn't work. We're all part of the community. And so I keep that in mind now. Banned books versus challenged books, as April said. Very interesting. It used to bother me. I was in charge for many years in the past of doing the banned books display for the Wilsonville Library. And very few of the books are actually banned. And I think that's important. I also think that you can argue that a challenge is not necessarily a bad thing. A challenge means that people are paying attention. A challenge means that a given book or other material is having an effect on somebody, and that's a good thing. We all live in communities and we all have differences. As the American Association of University Women, you are well educated by default, and that's a wonderful thing. We people who are educated tend to skew left, and that's a very good thing too. But the world can be a very threatening place to people, even to us, but to people who do not have the educational background that most of us do. I am going to share my screen now. This is, can you see it?
Yes.
Oh, good. This is our statement of concern form. We do have ours online. And one of the new things that we've done recently there, if you can hopefully see it, is number 3. Have you examined the entire item? If not, what sections did you review? Similarly to the Lake Oswego Library, this does trigger a form like this being turned in does trigger a contact with the library director, and also it goes to the library board to discuss it. We don't have a large number of these turned in any given year, rather small, which is also good. But there are very many different ways in which things can be censored or things can be done. It's not just for content. One of the jobs that April and I and everyone who works professionally as a librarian is a way to separate the wheat from the chaff. We discriminate books based on price. We discriminate based on professionalism, and yes, we do sometimes judge books by their cover. At least I do. So there's that. One recent example of that. One recent one was this publishing group called Winning Team Publishing. You might recognize some of the folks here. They are the owners and founders. And what this publishing company does is publish books at a very, very high price. So we had a request for this book published by this company, which were letters to the former president. And whoops. And as you can see, it costs $100, and they don't even gift wrap it. So I did not purchase this item. I did, however.
Greg, we did have a request and we did purchase it.
I know, but wait, we did. Eventually, I waited. I waited until I found it on Amazon for $25, and then I bought it. But now it's gone. I looked for it this morning, and it no longer is in our catalog, but you guys do have it. So if anybody wants it, you know where to find it. But there are many other ways in which things are challenged by other people. Another challenge that was fairly recently in the news was Dr. Seuss. I don't know if you remember this from about a year ago. They were hurtful, and now personally, I was a big fan of scrambled egg super when I was in elementary school. And I did question it. It took me a while, but I did find one of the illustrations that were considered offensive. And you can see down there in the lower left-hand corner. It's not for me to say whether this should or should not cause the entire book to be banned. Certainly it was a different time decades ago when these were written, and things do change. We don't have a copy of Little Black Sambo, for example, in the and various other things, which I remember were in libraries in my childhood. Oddly enough, I'm that old. But some things, as you can see, they hit your sensitivities or the sensitivities of people now, and that line is constantly shifting. It is constantly moving. And so people can and do have differences of opinion. Some people consider, the important thing is not to consider yourself necessarily more evolved. You may be more educated, but other people do have valid choices and do have valid things. The wrinkle nowadays is, as April said, they get together in groups, and groups, much more so than individuals, mobs, if you will, tend not to think about anything but just to go with what the orders that they've been given. And that is a real problem. And that is what we try to combat, and what we try to separate from valid people who are concerned about various things. One of the more recent examples of people wishing to ban something is my next tab up here. And this was about, well, it was 14 years ago. It was September of 2010. And a woman came in. She was, her husband was a minister. And she took great exception to us having, which we did at that time, the magazines cover out on the display area in the adult section. And there was this magazine.
I remember the series too, by the way, True Blood, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she indeed filled out the form, did the things, but by the time all had been said and done, of course, there was a new offensive Rolling Stone cover available to do, and it wasn't. But I think we can all agree that, yeah, she had a point there. That's gratuitous, perhaps, but it's a difficult question, right? Sometimes when you read these lists of banned books and, oh, look, it's Mark Twain, and oh, look, it's the Bible, ha, 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 those silly yokels, right? But in the library world, we sometimes run across these things that are interesting. I did a thing, let's see, with a book I put up. I don't think I could do this now. We're a much larger library, but in my early career, I got all of the most offensive books I could find and put them up, and I wrote, "Your tax dollars paid for all of these books. What do you think?" And it was a lot of fun because I had these things for people to write their things. Censorship has no place in a free society. Ask yourself, why is sex so much more disturbing than violence, war, and lies? And then you had the interesting ones that tried to split the difference. And they would say, there's no reason to ban these books simply because of personal views. But maybe you should put in a specific section for the things you deem unacceptable. Banning certain books creates bias and ignorance when we are all trying to create tolerance and understanding. It's a difficult line to cross. And then I put them actually in order. We had King and King in that display, which was the two dads book. And he said, I checked this book out as a bedtime story for my son. I didn't read it before I read it to my son and was stunned at the ending. It wasn't what I was expecting, and I don't want him taught that kind of relationship is okay. I agree that it should be banned. I didn't agree, but in fact, I bought it, I think. Anyway, there's a whole presentation of the thing. And since I only have 2 minutes left, I will end it by saying there are a lot more dangerous things on the horizon. Perhaps you've seen this. This is from 3 days ago, news article. And I came across this yesterday, not the Proud Boys. And this gentleman says that libraries are useless now. He is, I think, a board member of the Cato Institute, and you can find it online if you look him up, Mark Jaffe. He has no idea what libraries are or what they do. So anyway, please do continue to be alert. Please do be sensitive. And please know why you're doing what you're doing. Don't just mouth platitudes, because you will not convince the hearts and minds of those who disagree with you. Thank you very much.
Greg, that was wonderful. Thank you. We'll have some questions for you, so get ready. All right. And Linda Lybecker, our state president, I think you're on.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to Greg and April. Those were excellent presentations with current information. I learned some things, and I'm going to talk a little bit now about what we as AAUW members can do. So my background is as a public librarian in Oregon for all of my career in several different libraries. And I am now as on a small library, a small town library board. And of course, I'm chair of the board. So I'm paying attention to these things from all these different aspects. Besides being your president right now of AAUW of Oregon, in which case I've been looking at what California is doing and what the national staff of public policy is requesting we do in response to this and other public policy issues right now. So go ahead. So just a reminder, what does AAUW stand for? Our mission, advance gender and equity for women and girls, research, education, and advocacy, looking for a vision, equity for all, and our values, nonpartisan, that's important, fact-based, that's important, as Greg was referring to, principled, inclusive, and intersectional. I think all of those things relate to issues of challenging books. Next slide. What I was going to say is a little bit of what's been said already is pay attention. And I know many of you already are. So what's going on in your local community? I'm seeing in the community I live in that some people are hearing terrible things about the books that are going into libraries, and they're afraid. There's fear out there. And some of those same people are being urged to join school boards and library boards and clean up our community. So I want, so it's important for all of you to pay attention to what's going on and be able to step forward and express your own viewpoints where you can. This is just a little bit of a reminder. School board members are elected. And I think maybe 10 years ago, there often wasn't competition, but there generally is now, I've noticed. Depending on the public library, whether it's in a special district or whether it's part of a county or city, they may be elected separately if they're in a special district or appointed. All are volunteers, all are required to hold public meetings, and guests are welcome, at least theoretically, although there's usually strict limits to voice how long you're speaking. So encourage you to go to meetings, know what's going on, and if you have interest individually, volunteer to be on the board for your local public library. That they're often looking for board members. Next slide. Oh, the next thing I'm encouraging branches to do is hold candidates forums or debates, or find out what's going on and put together something. And this is an example. One just happened last week. Don't think it included school boards this time, but certainly there were some others. And I should say this slide, the next two, I just copied right off of my Facebook feed. So just to give you an idea. And this also gives us ideas of what other people in other branches are doing, so we can call them and ask them if we have questions. How did you do this? How did you work this out? So next slide. Astoria last year had a candidate forum. I didn't catch the last one. I got their advertisement to come to attend it. And next slide. Ashland had a candidate forum for school board candidates. And I understand that they asked some questions about people's views on intellectual freedom and book banning and various things that really brought out some opinions and thoughts of these people that were not in the voters pamphlet and they might not have known otherwise. So that was successful in that aspect. Next slide. So what we can do as branches under the AAUW name. I put together some leading thoughts here. You know, we're nonpartisan, so we have to make sure we are not coordinated with any candidate or party as branches. And inviting candidates to a forum, debate, or if we're just compiling a voter guide for our members, we need to invite all candidates. That's important. As a branch, we do not endorse or contribute to a campaign and do not lend or rent our mailing list. Now, this isn't all the rules, but these are the ones that I thought might pop into your mind if you wanted to help out a candidate. So things that I thought might most often come up. Next slide. Here's a good resource, and there's a state one too. This is a screenshot from our AAUW national website. And you can see on the left, second down, how to organize a candidate forum. There's the information on detailed rules there. And there's also other how-tos there for other things we might want to do to, if we feel like in our branch, our community needs to pay attention, get involved, make our voice heard, as the slide there says. Next slide. So resources. That last slide was on the web link right there in the top. Policy Advocacy Toolkit. And there is also a YouTube, which is just came out in the last month or so. It's a webinar is now put on YouTube at AAUW. School Boards, the Battleground for the Education Culture Wars. And there were some women from California who have developed quite an extensive program to pay attention to school boards and help members communicate with each other about what's going on with school boards and help influence who gets on the school board if they feel like it's as needed. So there's and what we can do as branches legally. So next slide. And then on our state website, and the link is right at the top, we have a branch public policy toolkit. I know Claire Berger was involved in putting this together, and there are some things that are outdated on it. I noticed when I was looking at it, but those that we'll keep getting it updated. It's similar to the national one, but more local examples. So another good source if you're thinking, I want to do a candidate forum, or how do I get involved? There's some good ideas right there. Next slide. Okay. I wanted to point out, because I've been paying attention to this, and I think I didn't know this a few years ago, even though I was an AAUW member, really. So I thought maybe some of you, these are the high points. As a nonprofit AAUW branch, there's 3 areas we need to pay attention to. Our AAUW policies, because we're all affiliates of AAUW, and that's where it says we may not contribute money or share our mailing lists. And then there are Oregon laws relating to lobbying and campaign finance. And the thing I thought I would highlight there is avoid gifts to speakers. Sometimes we want to, be generous, but in Oregon, gifts can get both the candidate and the giver into trouble pretty quickly. So just avoid that. And then third, there's IRS rules relating to our nonprofit status. When I looked up, some of our branches are 501c3s, which is an IRS designation. And under IRS rules, for instance, they cannot endorse candidates. And those, some of those, so some of the branches that I looked up, and they're listed, you're listed on the Oregon Department of Justice Charities guide. So Ashland, Astoria, Gresham, and Lakeview, and of course the AAUW of Oregon Special Projects Fund are all listed as 501c3. Other branches are organized under the 501c4, which is IRS calls it social welfare. And if people donate money to our branch, it's not tax deductible, but we can endorse nonpartisan candidates. Now, there's a number of caveats to that. So if a branch wants to do that, I'd ask you to check with our public policy chairs and or AAUW National Office. We'll make sure you stay on the legal side of things. So Tacos, I'll be happy to take questions after this. Next slide, and it's my last. So this is on the national site. It's a list with more information, but it's also advertising the next campaign coming out, which is Get Out the Vote campaign, which sort of coincides with the paying attention to school boards and your city councils and your other local elections. So there is, I think this is fairly new, this website, lots of information just coming out, and there's webinars about how to do it. All branches can certainly participate in Get Out the Vote campaigns. It's nonpartisan social welfare activity. And is maybe, local, paying attention to what's going on locally and helping get information out so people can choose, vote in people that with informed decisions, I think is as important now as it's ever been. So this is what's coming. And I'm finished with my slideshow. So maybe we should go let people ask questions.
All right, let's, I want to basically kind of move together on kind of thinking about what I heard particularly with Greg and with April, first of all, and I thank all of you and Linda as well for the wonderful presentations. And we are the branches, at the local level, that's where we start. That's the most important part of any kind of public policy or any kind of connection that we need to make with our local communities on all these levels. It's very important to do. So we want to be able to help as much as possible on that. A couple things that I picked up from April and from Greg to me were really important. One was all the subjects, the different areas through the years that have been not acceptable subjects have changed so much. And I'm so interesting to see how, depending on what the culture is, what the basic things are going around it, how different it is every 20 years or whatever, that certain areas are considered things that are not acceptable. So that to me was interesting. The other piece is that there's an organized effort, it sounds like, that is not just simply individuals, but coming and looking at what kind of books need to be banned, but they're working together in a very organized way. And often these groups are not from Oregon, which I think that's really interesting to think about as well. And I was also interested in, Greg, when you were talking about how important it is to be really clear from the library perspective, and I think probably from the community perspective, about how you communicate to people. That there have been mob challenges on the problem, and you need to really be cool and collected. I was really fascinated with that, how important it is. Everybody needs to kind of act like an adult. Oh my God. uh, which is not all happens. So I think what I'd like to do is, I've got a couple questions. You know, I can do that because I'm coordinating this piece of it. Whoops, before anybody else says anything. But one of the questions I have has to do with, do you see this tendency to pull together in a really organized fashion? Do you see this coming up? It's almost, again, kind of a cultural issue, I think, where you have your book banning. There's a voter worker problem. People are being harassed when they're trying to help with the voting systems. Do you see this as being some kind of organizing strategy for a bunch of different issues?
Yes.
Which one of you want to say something? Yeah, okay, April.
I was just going to say yes. I knew that the answer was yes to in the chat, Mara Faust. And so I was kind of during Linda's presentation looking up some facts. And what you want to look at is there's a source called PEN America, and there are many bills that are being introduced across the country that are similar in nature to the ones aimed at libraries that are also aimed at schools. And there's sort of a term, educational gag orders, is what people who don't like them call them. And so in 2023, there were 110 bills like that.
Oh,
that
geez.
State legislatures.
Oh, geez.
So yes, it is a strategy.
It's an organizing.
Used on many platforms and I'm just going to say it, people who are not fans of free speech.
Greg, do you want to add to that at all?
There has been what's new under the sun, I suppose, is that certain groups of people have rediscovered how to make large segments of the population fear. Yeah, all of this is underwritten by fear of change, fear of different, fear of the other. It's as old as time, but now it's back in new clothes, and that's what you see when you look.
Yeah, it's a way to go. Yeah. How about the other question I have, and then I'll open it up to other people to ask. SB 1583 didn't make it last session. Do you see, and this is the bill that actually banned these kind of organizational efforts on a local area, local basis, right? You can't ban books. It was, do you see this as something that we're going to see? Is there going to be something in 2025 that will carry this this message through to the next longer session? I mean, what do you think? Oh,
I'm glad I live in Oregon.
Yeah. Do you see this coming up in the next session?
I'm not sure. I like to follow things and research, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I have a read on the inside scoop of what people are going to propose next. I will say my guess is that there will be more legislation like this talked about in other states. And that it's because this was already legislation that was sort of copycatting from something Illinois did. We were copying. So it's possible that other states will also be copying that. I don't know if we'll go back to it again. I would like us to. I'm not sure what would need to change, though, in order for it to pass.
Well, we'll certainly follow this and hear more about it as things come along, because it's very important. So, okay, I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm going to choose people who have a question. Hold, you know how to hold up, the funny little hand that, so hold up your funny hand. Mary Pat has a funny hand up. Hi, my friend.
Hey, Claire. Great presentation. Thank you, April and Greg. I was fortunate to also see you at the Lake Oswego AAUW meeting, but there's always new information on this land. I have a question. I'm not entirely, well, it may not be related to banned books. It's certainly related to libraries and maybe is tangentially related. There, if I recall correctly, there was fairly recently a situation in a town in or near Grants Pass, I think, where people were allowed to opt out of library taxes because they didn't use the library. I find that very frightening. Talk about being scared. I find that
Yikes.
it's like opting out of paying school taxes because you don't have kids in the school or something. And I don't know if you see this as a one-off, as a trend, as related to banned books. If you have a comment, thank you.
Well, if you can't make us stop lending the books, then I feel like their other strategy is to just dry up our funds.
Yeah,
It's another way to try and harm libraries.
right, right. Greg?
I thought it was a very strange thing to get through because where does it stop?
Right.
It was one person, as I recall, and he was kind of a gadfly in the community. He had run for the library board and been rejected. And so then he took his ball and went home. How it was allowed to be seen as legal by the court, I like you, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know, but it's an ominous portent, certainly.
It bears watching, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Gail Clausen?
The situation in Grants Pass, that was approved by the county commissioners, and then it was later reversed because they realized the effects that could have. So they now have to pay those taxes anyway. So that whole issue has gone away.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good news.
Thank you, Gail. Marty?
Thank you, Claire. I just remember I'm hearing this evening the encouragement for people to volunteer at their libraries and get involved. I had the good fortune of being on the Multnomah County Library Advisory Board for 8 years.
Oh my goodness.
And it was incredibly, I got into the nitty gritty once a month with this group made up of people all over the Portland metropolitan, Multnomah County area. And I learned so much. And I even met some authors whose names you would recognize if I shared them. So it was an incredibly rewarding time to learn about how vital our libraries are.
Yes.
And so I encourage everybody, get involved.
Excellent. Excellent. Pam, do you see anybody else with their hand up?
I do see a question from Heidi.
Why don't we answer that?
I can answer that. Well, Nancy, maybe.
Okay, Heidi.
Let's read it out loud.
The question is, oh, sorry.
Are folks who live outside of a specific library's boundaries and file challenges considered legitimate? April mentioned that only 1/4 of registered complaints come from people within the library's reach.
And that was for school libraries.
School district.
School district libraries. And then it is going to be a case by case. Each library determines its own policies about what challenges it will and will not accept as challenges. And then each library is responsible for reporting the challenges that come to them to the ALA to record for official statistics. So some of the challenges even that we get, if it's a casual conversation, may not even be passed to the ALA from our library at Lake Oswego. Because if it's a casual conversation, we don't even report it. But outside the library, we don't consider them valid, but other places sometimes do.
Okay.
Interesting.
Nancy?
Nancy posted a comment in chat.
Yeah, I know she did. I was wondering, she also put her hand up. So I was wondering if she'd like to speak to that.
So how about I read that?
That sounds good.
Unfortunately, it costs the Josephine Community Library about $12,000 to defend against this case. Oh, Nancy, we'd like to hear more about that. Nancy, if you could chime in.
Does anybody have any questions towards Linda with Linda Lybecker on her issue on what we can each do in the branches?
There's a
Any
couple
questions?
of hands up to.
Okay, thank you, Pam. Mary Pat, are you one of them?
Yeah, I'm one of them. But I raised my hand before you.
Oh, okay. Let's just open it all up. Yeah.
So I'm just curious, what is the rate of usage in the public libraries now? At least Lake Oswego and Wilsonville, or more broadly, if you know, are the libraries used more or less or about the same than they were 5, 10 years ago, 20 years ago?
April, Greg? Great.
Well, I can speak in terms of my I can't I'm not going to even try to remember the statistic. I knew it at one point. It's a goodly proportion of the people in our service area that have library cards. We do track that. But certainly since the pandemic, I don't know if this is true for you as well, April, but we've seen a great deal more number of people coming in for everything. We have not the everything is up, of course, from the pandemic, but I believe it's also up from pre-pandemic. We have a number of ancillary programs. We have the Oregon, see, I got stage fright. We've got the people that help people to make their rent and with legal problems. They come in on Tuesdays, and they generally have quite a bit of business from people coming in. We've got computers that are very popular. We've got any number of programs for adults and for children that draw in a lot of folks. So yes, we're doing a land office business.
April?
I also don't have the numbers memorized, but I can speak in a general sense. In terms of pure lending statistics for physical books, we're slightly down. In terms of lending for ebooks, way up. We saw a big increase in lending ebooks over the pandemic, and then we expected those numbers to taper afterwards, but in fact, they're still growing. And then in terms of foot traffic, that is, we do a gate count. So every person that walks through, we got click, click, click. That's up. So we are now seeing more people physically coming into the library than we saw in 2018. So, and again, like Greg said, I actually think part of that at this exact historical moment is pandemic driven, and that people are really desperate to come and be around people in a safe environment and to connect in ways, again, in ways that are very safe. For instance, doing a craft at a library or attending a board game night.
Good point. I see Nancy is she's figured out how to unmute.
Yay.
Yay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I was clicking that unmute button over and over. I don't know why it would not work. Anyway, the $12,000 I was referring to was the case that the one citizen in the community decided that he wanted to opt out of the tax district. He was buddies with at least two of the 3 county commissioners, and they approved him opting out. I was at that commissioners meeting, which was very well attended by both sides of the discussion. And they subsequently found out that, boy, the county commissioners should have done their homework before they approved it. But it did, unfortunately, cost the library about $12,000 to hire the lawyers to defend against this case, and they were successful, but it was expensive.
That's a shame. Oh, thank you, Nancy. Gosh.
Worth it though.
Yeah.
Well worth it. Well worth it not only for our community, but for every single taxing district in the state, because it could potentially have applied to much more than just libraries.
Good Lord. Marty?
Well, the question in terms of how are libraries used today, I believe I left the county board advisory board about 5 years ago, and at that time, the circulation of course, our libraries do so much more than circulate books, but the circulation was either number 2 or 3 tops in the nation.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, really close to Seattle Public Library, and occasionally beating out New York City.
Whoa.
The entire
That's
state of
amazing.
Oregon has a lot of readers in general. All of our libraries in Oregon do really well. I love you guys. Thank you for reading all of
Suzanne?
I volunteer 2 afternoons a week at the Josephine Community Library in the children's department. There are 15 paid staff and many, many, many volunteers. And we have volunteers who come and help, and one of my jobs is to train the teens, and they're wonderful. If you're worried about our next generation, don't be. They're wonderful kids. Yeah, absolutely.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
Good to hear.
But we're getting grants. It's wonderful, because when I moved to Grants Pass in 2008, the libraries were closed.
Oh.
The county commissioners balanced the county budget on the backs of the libraries. Wow. And so then a group of us decided that we couldn't live in a community that didn't have libraries. And so through a great deal of effort by many of us, we passed a library district. My husband and I did not live in the library district, but we were the first people to opt in.
Which, by the way, there are studies showing that when you close libraries, you pay more in policing.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You also decrease the scores in your local school districts.
Yes.
So if people are like, oh, easy cut, I mean, you're not really saving money.
No.
Because you're going to have to direct more of money towards education and more towards your police force when you close us down.
Sometimes I ask people, I say, imagine today if libraries had never existed, and you say, I'm going to use taxpayer money to buy a giant collection of books, and then I'm going to get a building that's also funded by taxpayer money and a staff the same. I'm going to put those on the shelf, and I'm going to let people come in and take them home for free and return them. How far do you think that idea would get?
But Greg, it was started by capitalists, so it's great.
That's right. I love it.
We've kind of lost in our country if you want to call it the third space or the public wheel, anything. It's something to ponder. It's a cone.
So we have 5 minutes left.
Josephine County is also fine free.
Hey, there you go, fine free. I remember paying a few fines in my time. Anybody else have any more questions? Great questions. Nancy, do you want to? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one more comment, and it's on a personal level because Suzanne mentioned the volunteers that we have in our library. My first job was as they called it a page in a library. My grandson volunteered at the Josephine Community Library when he was in high school. He is graduating next month with a master's in library and information science from University of Washington.
Yeah.
And he's looking for a job. Little plug there, but
Think you need to
um,
I got the
I'm-
last one.
it runs in the
Wonderful.
family. It's
Mhm.
important to our community.
Absolutely. Any more questions? This was wonderful. I learned so much. Thank you so much, Linda, April, and Greg.
Yep.
My gosh.
And Claire,
Um,
thank you for keeping us on the move.
Well, thank you. This is great. Hey, good job, you guys. Remember, we've got, you know, we're moving on this stuff. Okay, we're moving and shaking.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, especially our guest this evening. We really appreciate it.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody, and good night.